The bottom line is their economy doesn't work. That revolution, it's not even a revolution, that thing they have has survived on subsidies from the Soviet Union and now from Venezuela. They don't get subsidies anymore, so they're in a lot of trouble. And the people in charge, they don't know how to fix it. So they have to get new people in charge.
In our world lead, that was Secretary of State Marco Rubio calling for new leadership in Cuba as that island scrambles to restore power. Crews reconnected many electrical grids across Cuba, according to the island's Energy and Mines Ministry. Yesterday, a total collapse of the system left some 10 million people there without power. CNN's Patrick Ottman shows us now life in Cuba after that collapse, the first since the U.S. effectively shut off Cuba's oil supply from Venezuela.
A countrywide blackout, Cuba's entire electrical grid collapsing, plunging millions into darkness. Officials say there were no immediate faults detected at the time the grid collapsed, as the investigation and repair works continue. The outage comes after weeks of mounting pressure, with the United States cutting off oil supplies to the island. Cuba depends heavily on that fuel to generate electricity, and without it, the system is buckling. The crisis is taking a hit on daily life.
When it comes to cooking, you have to cook earlier, because once night falls, well, you can imagine. The water. You can't use the pump to get water up to the roof. There are so many things. It generally affects everything, almost 100% of life.
There is no electricity, no food, no oil, no fuel, and private businesses have high prices because everything is going up now, since they have to move their goods by truck and transport. All of this is really very bad.
Frustration is spilling into the streets, with protests over food shortages and constant outages. And into this crisis, controversial comments from Donald Trump.
You know, all my life I've been hearing about the United States and Cuba. When will the United States do it? I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Cuban officials firing back, blaming Washington for deepening this crisis through sanctions and what they call an oil blockade. President Miguel Diaz-Canel says the country has not received oil shipments in months, calling the impact tremendous. Diaz-Canel also saying the government will not tolerate acts of, quote, vandalism, referring to a violent protest where demonstrators on Saturday attempted to burn down the Communist Party headquarters in a small town. At least 5 people were arrested, the government said. Despite power coming back online, much of Cuba remains in the dark, caught between a collapsing energy system and rising tensions with the United States. And Jake, even though power is coming back on slowly, it's likely just to come back on for a couple hours. The underlying problems that brought down this power grid, the fact that it is so old, it has been so underfunded over the years, and now it is starved of oil from abroad, remains. So Cubans are preparing themselves for the worst. Officials here are hoping the U.S. throws them a lifeline, but you just heard Marco Rubio a little while ago saying this island needs new leadership. That appears to be the policy of the Trump administration, that Cuba's leaders need to have a shakeup at the very top.
President Trump just yesterday floated this idea of taking over Cuba, potentially. I mean, does the United States have the resources? You look what happened in Venezuela, now the war with Iran, and now this Cuba situation.
I think everyone, particularly within the MAGA base, is asking this idea of, is the United States going to be the world's policeman? And that was something that Donald Trump and Republicans ran against in 2024, that we're not going to get into this idea of endless wars. And so the idea that we're now going to, quote, take over Cuba, I mean, what does that look like? You're going to cut off the head of the regime, but then leave it basically intact, sort of what we've done in Venezuela. I think this president is putting Americans into situations where you're already seeing a loss of life within Iran. But again, why are we entering into these conflicts and not looking for diplomatic solutions? I mean, no one is saying that the Cuban regime is in any way humanitarian or has been looking out for the Cuban people. But there are diplomatic levers that we can pull with Cuba, Iran, in the Middle East, anywhere in the world. And it feels like this president is continuing to rely on the U.S. military to do some of the diplomatic work to lessen the tensions.
You know, it's interesting because Trump used the word takeover of the island, takeover of Cuba. What do you think he's talking about? Really sending in U.S. ground troops to do in Cuba what the U.S. did in Venezuela?
Well, he conducts schizophrenic diplomacy virtually every day, and he might very well change his mind tomorrow. I would submit to you that he's probably looking at some kind of Maduro takedown. But, I mean, what we're seeing, unfortunately, in real time is a degradation to American prestige and influence. It's happening every day. You look at Europe, they're not supporting this war. Why? Because we didn't come and talk to them about it beforehand. We did not build a coalition like we did in Iraq. I served proudly with 32 other nations when I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, I mean, it's very confusing what Mr. Trump is saying about Cuba. And I think our nations, our allies are looking at this and saying, you know, maybe the Americans aren't a reliable partner like they've been in the past. And maybe it's time to start looking at doing more for ourselves and less reliance on the Americans.
Power is slowly being restored in Cuba after the 10 million people on the island lost that power when the island's electrical grid collapsed. This is the first time the entire country has gone dark since the Trump administration cut off foreign oil supplies. The crisis has sparked protests in the streets as emergency measures have also meant reduced school hours and cutbacks on hospital services. Yesterday, President Trump talked about taking over Cuba, and this afternoon, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said it will take a change in leadership to bring change to Cuba.
The bottom line is their economy doesn't work. It's a non-functional economy. It's an economy that has survived. That revolution, it's not even a revolution, that thing they have has survived on subsidies from the Soviet Union and now from Venezuela. They don't get subsidies anymore, so they're in a lot of trouble. And the people in charge, they don't know how to fix it. So they have to get new people in charge.
CNN's Patrick Ottman is in Havana for us. Patrick, tell us about the situation right now.
Well, power is slowly coming back on, but of course, you always put a bit of a caveat with that because the power comes back and it immediately collapses, or officials simply don't have the fuel to keep power on in all of Havana, all of Cuba at the same time. So it'll come back on for a few hours and then be taken away. That's about as good as it gets these days in Cuba. And so to have a 24-hour island-wide power outage, that is very concerning. But of course, we're only going back, in the best cases, to having a couple hours of power each day. And so the underlying causes of this power outage, the fact that no oil is coming in, that the electrical system here is so old, it has not been invested in over the years, is collapsing. That is not going to change. In fact, going forward, as this Trump oil blockade continues, we'll probably see more and more of these larger blackouts that, of course, are having a major impact on how people live here.
And Patrick, in response to this crisis, Cuba is actually making changes to encourage Cuban exiles to invest in the country. Tell us about this.
You know, these are reforms that have been discussed here for many, many years. But last night, during this power outage, so very few people here saw the announcement. A Cuban official who is a Castro family member and is the Minister of Foreign Commerce came on and said that they were finally going to greenlight these long debated changes that will allow Cuban exiles to come back and set up businesses but not own property. It would open the door to investing in Cuba, but not in the way that many Cuban exiles have been hoping for. It's not a full kind of perestroika opening of the economy. And so you saw Marco Rubio earlier today saying these reforms are simply not enough. If they were meant as concessions, it does not seem like the United States says they go far enough.